Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about measuring twice and cutting once. So let's get into it. Frederick, would you agree that software engineers should always measure twice and cut once? That depends. It's one of those. It's one of those. This is one of those sayings that can mean the right thing, but as I well, I would like to someday go down in history as famously saying that nothing you say or do matters when a stupid person is involved, because the reality is that measuring twice and cutting once, it's one of those sayings where, if you're an idiot, you're going to apply it incorrectly, and you don't understand the wisdom in the words. And if you're an intelligent person, you don't really have to follow a saying like that. It's really, in my opinion, these sorts of sayings are just a way for someone to make a point, similar to, it's a nice way of saying that make sure that you know what you're doing before you're doing it. That's basically it. Because if you half-ass things, or if you don't think them through, you're gonna cut something at the wrong point, or you're gonna do something incorrectly, and then it's not gonna turn out. So shaking it an extra time is a good idea. This is another way, which is much less elegant to say this than something else. But then again, guys, I've talked to people who have this idea where they don't understand why, in my opinion at the very least, why this sort of saying makes sense, and they take it to the extreme where they may become so cautious, because this is the wisdom they derive is that, oh, I should make damn sure that I know what I'm doing to inform myself of basically being data driven, so that I can take action, which can lead to decision paralysis, because they can never make a decision, because they can never stop researching, because they fail to fundamentally understand that all research everywhere, everything that has to be data driven, is at the end of the day going to end up with someone making a decision based on gut feeling. It does not matter if you collected all the data in the universe. Since you do not know the future, it is still just you reading through as much information as humanly possible and then saying yes or no, or this or that. That's all it ever is, which means that the goal is not to collect as much data as humanly possible. The goal is to inform yourself well enough to make the best decision possible given the circumstances. That is what the goal is. And see, when you deal with people who are intelligent, they usually understand that, okay, in order for me to make a pretty good, like if we're going to stick with the analogy, if you're going to cut something, a piece of wood or something like that, well, you don't have to measure twice. If you are confident in that the first time you did it, you measured it so well, or you even put a little mark down there so you don't have to do it twice, because you know that you're not going to fuck it up. Then you can measure once and cut once. That's very effective, right? But then the wisdom in these words is sort of lost. But as I said, you can turn that around and say, well, why stop at measuring twice? Measure 30 times, because you could have made a mistake 100 times, 1,000 times. How many times do you think is just enough? Well, the answer to that question is it depends on who's doing the cutting. And probably, if you were going to go really philosophical, it's going to depend on what you're going to cut. If you try to cut something like wood, it might be a little bit too much to measure 1,000 times. But if you're going to cut atoms, well, or split atoms, I hope that you see what I'm going with this. It depends. And so if we're gonna sidetrack a little bit from this philosophical angle, the reality is that it's the same thing with software, executing on software and so forth. But the problem is, as I've said before, it does not matter what saying, what ideology you have, or whatever. Like, none of this matters, guys, if you have a stupid person. stupid people, like it's the same thing with software developers, guys. The main reason why we have such enormous problems with software companies and IT solutions is because of incompetence. It's always coming down to incompetence, because the world has unfortunately, we don't have enough talented people to go around. And it doesn't really matter how many times you tell a stupid person that you should measure, because the reality is, as I said, how many times you measure or how much research you have to do, it is irrelevant if the person cannot learn from what they're doing. You could ask anyone. Like, I mean, if you ask, as I like to say, if it does not matter how frustrated you become when you're trying to teach a dog algebra, the dog is still just going to wag its tail because it's trying its best to understand, but it is beyond the dog to learn algebra. And nothing you say or do will change that fact. It is also the same thing I say when I say to people, if you're hiring software developers and you don't know what you need, then you basically just crossing your fingers hoping that you're going to get lucky when you hire someone. This is why some juniors end up having to do a senior's job. Like, this might be a really good junior, but they're simply out of their depth. You put them in a situation where it doesn't matter if they measure 100 times because they lack the necessary talent to execute correctly. And nothing can fix that problem. That's why I argue to people that it's better for you to instead, if you're going to be like that, to take the approach that making mistakes are cheap. It's cheap to make mistakes. Because if we're going to stick with the cutting analogy, it doesn't matter how many times I cut if I have an endless supply of wood. Or if I have self-healing wood where I can cut and then say, oh no, actually that didn't turn out so well, undo. Okay, cut again, undo. Cut again, undo. Because then I am at the very least not losing anything from trying to do the cutting. And the process of learning, which gives me the ability to understand where I should cut, is cheaper. Now we're getting really fluffy, but I hope that makes sense to you. So what I want you to take away from this is that, yes, well, saying that anybody who, regardless of who it is, should measure twice and cut once. But as I said, guys, you don't even have to do the measuring if you've cut 1,000,000 times, and you can basically on gut feeling see where the cut is, because results is what matters, guys. The research and the prep work and the making sure that you know what you're doing stuff goes without saying, in my opinion. It's just something that seems to be unintuitive to stupid people, as I like to say. But the problem with stupid people is that even if you were to ask them to cut twice and so forth, you're basically betting on that they're able to meet the expectations of the current challenge that they have. If you give me a challenge where, for example, if I'm going to do brain surgery, it does not matter how many times I measure, because I'm going to kill that poor person that I'm going to operate on, because it's a task that is way beyond what I am able to do. And the same thing applies to your software developers. If you're asking people to research very complicated things or so forth and so forth, no amount of measuring, no amount of prep work is going to help you with that. It's not possible. Therefore, as I said, it comes down to one part, what are you doing, and one part, who is doing the cutting or whatever, right? So is why I tell people that if you're gonna be in a situation where you're gonna try to measure things and do cutting and so forth, it has to be in a balancing act, because you can paralyze yourself from doing anything by just researching. And trust me, guys, there is so much fear in the world related to doing things that you have no idea. A lot of companies produce nothing. Everybody's just talking about doing stuff because they have no ability and just mountains of fear of doing anything. And then you have people on the other side who is just never, like, they're just doing things without any logic or reason. And as per usual, it comes down to finding the right person who knows how to actually execute effectively. And the only way I've ever found to be effective, the only thing that I've ever found to work in this scenario is to reduce the cost of trying to the point where trying is just something that we do, experimentation, all of this sort of stuff. That is the thing that gives you that perfect slice or cut and gives you the formula for how to execute effectively on any given task. Have a great day.